I may not agree with the emergency decree, but I do have to give credit where credit is due, and there is a part of it that is actually somewhat genius in the way that it was done. But there are definitely a few holes that I personally see as a non-legal expert, although I might say that I'm familiar with more than just the basics. But anyway, I'm Rafael di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Before I get started with this episode, of course, I have to say, the following thoughts are those of mine alone, and they do not represent any other individuals or any commercial entities of any kind. This is just me, myself, and I speaking here. Last Friday night, I uploaded my episode talking about this latest emergency decree. And in this episode, I wanted to talk about why I actually do think that it was genius. Let's maybe go for a little bit of background first before I actually get to that specific point. For years in Italy, I have been seeing politicians on one side or the other talking about getting rid of Italian citizenship by descent, often brought up around the same time as the discussion around citizenship by naturalization, or sometimes in tandem, connected directly. Of course, if you've been watching my videos for a while and these episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, you'll know that I fully disagree with the connection between these two, because even though we might be talking about acquisition of citizenship in one case, it's not the case in the other for citizenship by naturalization. We have to remember that under the old rules, or under the rules maybe as they should be, based on how they were written, it didn't matter whether a person, as I said last week, was born in the middle of Rome, Timbuktu, Amazon, wherever. Those people, as long as they all came from a direct line of Italian descent, all equally had the right to Italian citizenship. Am I saying that I think that this is necessarily the ultimate way of doing things? No, but that's how it's been for a very, very long time. And many have been making the argument, well, this can't be legal. It's not constitutional. It's not this, it's not that. And here's the thing. Governments make changes. This is very possible. This is very much within the rights that any Italian politician would have to be able to go and figure out a legal means of enacting something. But I'm not saying I think this was done correctly or that there aren't any problems with how it was done. But we have to keep in mind, depending on what government may be in power or what may be popular at the time, rules change. Change is most definitely an inevitable part of life. But in the past, when there have been attacks against Jure Sanguinis, a lot of the politicians, for example, there's one in particular that I made a few videos about quite a few years ago, but not limited to that individual, didn't take into account how the basic principle works. And especially when you combine it with other parts of Italian law, including things like discrimination. In years past, thus far, the main way of quote-unquote attacking Italian citizenship by descent has always been by going for it directly. And when you start looking at that, if you go for how somebody born abroad might be eligible for citizenship, there's an immediate change between how two people who are equally Italian citizens might have access to the system. Or even, for example, like I mentioned last week, I could understand a linguistic requirement and a residency requirement, but even that is an argument that does have maybe some points against it, because why should a person who lives in a different place not have the freedom to live abroad and be treated differently? That's another big possible argument against it. I do actually believe that there are ways around that. I'm not sure if I'll get into that in this video or not, but then there are other things that have been spoken about in the past, more recently, such as jus culturae, getting citizenship through cultural, linguistic, and educational means, that a person has maybe gone through schooling here and a person maybe has a certain level of understanding of what life is actually like in Italy based on their own experiences. And even attached to this decree, there has been a proposal discussed about even having a centralized office for all of this to take place in, and all of these citizenship by descent cases to be run through. This is something that I've been saying should have been for years, that there should be one set of rules, one office to easily take care of it, having as many clerks available as possible to be able to efficiently run through the system. I mean, okay, maybe it would still have to run through certain aspects of confirming certain data with other consulates and municipalities and so on, but really, the process needs to be simplified regardless. But even though I might believe in a change like that, I don't necessarily believe in the generational limit, even though I could maybe understand a limit at the third or fourth generation. But even if you were to introduce this right to citizenship through education for Italian citizenship by descent, at least under the previous rules, then you would be creating a difference between these two groups of people. Could there be the argument that maybe somebody born in Italy is actually going to go through this in their daily life, in their kind of average schooling? Yes. But you also have to consider there are many people born and raised in this country with the right to citizenship that do not grow up as native Italian speakers. Even back when I was an English teacher, I mean, I was living in a region that was native German speaking majority. And I even had students that not just that they didn't really feel comfortable speaking in Italian, but maybe even couldn't speak in Italian, or that they just straight up had zero need for Italian in their day-to-day life because maybe in their village that nobody spoke Italian and everybody just spoke the local dialect. So if you're making a requirement based on language, the Italian language specifically, then you're starting to cut out a lot of people who might not necessarily be Italian speakers. And then consider all the dialect speakers that speak their own dialect of Italian that might supersede their ability to speak kind of standard Italian. So to make it based on education also comes with some problems along with it. But here, maybe actually getting back to my idea that I was talking about, why I could see that a cultural and or linguistic and or physical requirement could be worthwhile looking at, is because a person could be a citizen of a country, but maybe could you limit the documentation that they have access to? Maybe that's also a thing that you could say that there's discrimination in that case, but what if, for example, a citizen were to be born outside of the country? They can get their Italian citizenship, but what if they want their Italian passport or an Italian ID? I mean, for an Italian ID, if you're not living in the EU, then there's a whole different thing. But if you are wanting to get your passport, then I think in that case, it would be very fair to say it would be necessary to live for a year or two in Italy, not just that you have to live in Italy, but that there would be these mandatory classes that you would have to go to for language, or that you would have to give proof that you've already done some sort of equivalent schooling or education in the Italian language. I mean, there are plenty of courses, these cultural courses around the country that Italy has that are funded that bring Italian Americans to Italy so that they can be able to get in touch with their homeland. But then at the same time, oh, no, we want you connected to your homeland, but not too connected. Oh, heaven forbid such a thing. But I will say, on a very much of a side note here, taking a little bit of a detour on this line of thought. Lately, I've been hearing, oh my gosh, it's this government, it's their politics, it's the leader, it's the this, it's the that. If you've been looking at politics in Italy for a while, it's not a single issue on one side of the aisle or the other. Both sides of the aisle have attacked Italian citizenship by descent. I've maybe seen it more from one direction than the other. And it's probably not the direction that you're thinking. But even years ago, I did have a very short conversation with one Italian politician who you would definitely recognize on TV if you were to see this individual. And they were very interested in this. They didn't fully understand how it worked. And funny enough, now they are indirectly associated with what is coming into play now. So even some of the people that do get associated or tied up in all of these things don't fully understand how it works or what's going on. But to divert back to the previous line of thought, I would say that one big issue within this is that it is very clear that this is being done with intention to hold a specific group of people back from accessing their rights to Italian citizenship. Again, if you watch the press conference, there was a very particular part of this world mentioned. So I would say that's actually maybe one of the biggest holes in all of this, that there is very clear discrimination. Granted, have there been issues from service providers or individuals who have really done things incorrectly? Yes, it's happened. But there have also been things happening from other people from other parts of the world who are just as eligible for Italian citizenship, but maybe there is more coming from a certain group rather than another group. I'm not going to say for sure or make any accusations here, but there have definitely been some Wild West service providers catering to all different sorts of groups of people. This is why even personally, I'm very picky about with whom I associate with in this whole field. But let's finally get to why I think it's actually genius the way that this was done, even if I disagree with it. Because so far, every argument that I've ever heard, and even that I've ever tried to come up with, and even from any Italian legal expert that I've ever had the chance to speak to, that has ever come up with any kind of reason, there is always a legitimate argument against it. There's even a legitimate argument against this whole decree that's been made now and the way that it's been done. It's even being brought in front of the Constitutional Court, but that's a whole different thing. But like I said at the beginning of the episode, I do have to give credit where credit is due. And I do believe that, in fact, even if I'm not happy with this decree, that there is some form of genius or brilliance behind how they went for it. The reason being is that until now, every quote-unquote attack against Jure Sanguinis has really gone for it directly. There are so many arguments for it and so many arguments against it, but all of the arguments for it kind of outweigh the arguments that you would make to really make a change there. Again, I still don't see that this decree is perfect either, but by not going for Italian citizenship by descent directly and calling this an emergency reaction to an emergency situation, then it's not that Italian citizenship is directly the issue or the topic at hand. And even though going for Jure Sanguinis could be very difficult, going in this roundabout way that eventually takes you there was a smart move for those who would be against this. Again, though, there are arguments to make against this way of going about things, whether it's constitutional, whether it's properly done. And again, even as a non-legal expert, I can see holes in the argument and the way that this was done. But of course, I'm not in the Italian government, nor is it up for me to decide. But there are those who are going to have to take a look at this and make their vote count. But the genius of this in particular is by not going for Italian citizenship by descent directly. It's by referring to an emergency situation that they've defined. There could be a whole discussion in and of itself within that topic just specifically. And how would you prove that? How would you define that? What actually constitutes emergency? It is definitely for sure the case that there have not been enough people over the years to be able to work on these, to be able to give enough appointments to people that maybe would even be within a timely manner. You do have to look at this process even from a procedural standpoint, taking quite a bit of time. There are a lot of steps in the process. There are a lot of things that have to be confirmed. But even for those of you who've been going through the initial gathering phase, there's a lot to do there. I mean, say you pick up a document. Oh, look, there's a G instead of a J. Well, you got to probably go get that fixed. And then the whole process to get that fixed will depend on the type of document, the type of certification that it needs, and this, that, and the other, and what state you might be in, what country you might be in, what actually has to happen. So I very well understand and empathize and sympathize with those who are in some of those earlier stages, that they've maybe spent money on getting documents, that they've spent time and energy and headaches to try and get themselves through this process. It takes a long time. I mean, it took me more than a decade. I mean, I forget exactly how much, but it's like 14 years, I think, 15, 16, whatever. Long amount of time, way longer than it ever should have taken. And this is why I think there actually should be a central office that can handle all of these things and give the final answers themselves without having to go and confirm information through municipalities and consulates. It should be a one-stop shop. It would make it better for everybody overall. And even if the petitioning fee were higher, I would still say that could be fair. Would it get expensive quickly? Yes, especially for a family. But we're not talking about a very small, insignificant thing here. And we're talking about this process being a delayed birth registration. So could we say that maybe it could be put in place as a deterrent for individuals to forget registering and to make sure that they do register ahead of time, that maybe people are given X amount of time to be able to do so. But then after that, there's maybe this fine that a person would have for not going through the process, but then having to pay for a fine for each generation and something that you had no control of. Okay, there are arguments against that as well. But then, of course, there are arguments such as, why should a person X amount of generations down the line who's never lived in Italy, who's never paid into the Italian tax system, who's never learned Italian, who's never this, who's never that, or even if somebody has, what gives them the right, maybe for an elderly individual, to come to Italy and then be able to access healthcare, or even a young person to access healthcare in the country? And I think it would be fair to say that for an individual who's actually serious about coming to live in Italy, who would be Italian citizen by descent, at least for most people that I know, maybe are there the occasional exceptions? Yes. But for the vast majority, they're probably going to end up having to pay into the system one way or the other, whether it's some sort of taxes or social security. Depending on what stage in life they're in, there's going to be some payment into the system. And I mean, look, sales tax. It's not like you're able to avoid sales tax by just simply existing in the country. There are different levels of taxes for things and different ways that things are taxed. But at some point on something, there's going to be IVA included on what you're paying. And then, of course, like last week I mentioned, there's the cultural aspect. And there is a difference between Italian American and Italian. They're not the same thing, but one comes from the other. You can't deny that. Why would Italian be included in Italian American if it didn't have an origin from Italy? So it's not like Italian Americans or Italian Brazilians or Italian, whatever it might be, Italian Martians. I mean, if a person is of Italian descent, that means their family had to come from somewhere. I think that is most definitely clear as well. But to put it into terms how it has been, of, oh, those people, they want Italian citizenship. They want to take advantage of the system. They don't want this or that, Maybe there's somebody out there who does. Maybe there's someone who just is looking at Italian citizenship just for a leg up in the world. Does that exist? I would not doubt that there would be an individual looking for that. But I can say personally, the majority of people who I know who have Italian citizenship by descent, and the thousands upon thousands of people that I've interacted with over the years through my projects online, I can say the vast majority are most definitely very serious about making Italy a reality. But I don't necessarily think that it is the right thing for everybody. And one of the reasons why I do say that even I understand at least some sort of minimum residency requirement in Italy as an Italian citizen for some period of time is because there are many people who have no interest in practically needing their citizenship. They're only interested in being able to take a vacation to Italy. And I think it's really unfortunate. It's almost a waste of time, energy, and money and resources for the individual who's just looking for Italian citizenship just so that they can take a vacation to Italy and go through the EU line for that one trip a year or that one trip every 10 years. I mean, it's really unfortunate. I would love to see some sort of prioritization for individuals who have a commitment to live in Italy or will be living in Italy or currently are living in Italy, and to make sure that they have their access to something that they practically can use. But even there's an argument that came out of the Friuli region recently from a member of the Lega saying, well, what about protecting our children's rights? What about protecting the rights of our descendants to be able to have access to real estate or assets or something in the country, and to have their ability to be here, to be able to be attached and connected to their country? I'm paraphrasing here and maybe I added a little something, but in short, that was roughly the gist of what was being said. And for that reason alone, I fully agree with that. I mean, do I plan at some point in my life to be living in Italy? Most definitely. I've already lived there. I've called it home before, and I would love to call it home again. Just at this point in time, there are just things that are going on in my life that make it better for me to call somewhere else home for the time being. But Italy is very much a part of my life on a daily basis in one way or the other. I'm always interacting. A lot of my work has to do with Italy. A lot of my passions have to do with what is going on in the country. I mean, this whole project, Not Your Average Globetrotter, really started because of my whole journey to getting Italian citizenship by descent. And then one way or another, that led to the Italian Citizenship podcast, which led to the Italian Real Estate podcast, which led to Ask the Italian Lawyer. There are these various projects in various parts of my life that I'm a part of that are, maybe some are in front of camera, maybe I'm behind the scenes in some ways and some other things, but a lot of parts of my life revolve around one thing or another to do with Italy. So for me, as someone who feels very connected to the country, and even if my linguistic skills in Italian aren't perfect, but being able to get around, I can do, I just really feel not happy with seeing this type of limit put in place, because I know there are others out there who might feel similarly. Maybe is it going to be a minority of people who might feel the same way in the same type of way that I do? Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, very fair to say. But I do think there are a significant number who realistically are looking to make Italy a part of their life in a very meaningful way and a very practical way. That's another rant on this topic. And I have to say, I'm really so sad to see this in place. And I really hope that there's some way to be able to get around this. I mean, if you're curious to hear more and actually ways of potentially even fighting against this and even ways of challenging this decree, I highly recommend checking out this latest episode of the Italian Citizenship podcast that I do with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. This is no paid endorsement. This is just me as someone passionate about this topic that is really believing in that project and the information there. I highly recommend it. This week's episode was extremely informative. Although I actually could probably say that about every episode. But episode 153, if you haven't seen 152 yet, I recommend 152 and then 153 of the Italian Citizenship podcast. If you're interested in this topic, they will shed a lot of light on what is happening, what's going on, and some theoretical possibilities within this space. But anyway, I'm Rafael di Furia. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. A huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis. But of course, again, I'm Rafael di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.